Yes. I knew you'd do it. Here we go. There's Maya. Here I come. Watch me off the boat. Oh, yeah. Here comes Maya with the most.
Yes, okay. Good morning, Timothy. Good morning, everybody who is with us in Clubhouse first, and then LinkedIn and YouTube, probably Facebook as well. It's a pleasure to have you with us for this 155th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with the CEO of Langley Esquire, Timothy Langley, who is here with us today, surprisingly and
Surprisingly.
yes, and unbelievably, but still. So Timothy, thank you very much for being here and getting ready for this session as well. So early in the morning. I'm not going to keep anybody waiting any longer, and I'll give you the mic straight away. So please
Thank you very much,
go
Maya.
ahead.
There has
Yes.
been a lot going on and a lot for us to talk about. Welcome and good morning, everybody. Today is January 28th, 2024. This last week was really explosive, as we predicted. A lot goes on, and in this program, in this briefing, we try and give you the latest of what's going on week by week. So if this is your first time to participate, you might not make all the news, I might not make all the news make sense to you, but after you've listened a couple of weeks in a row, you will get caught up with everything. So this last week was eventful for a couple of reasons. One was that the diet opened on Friday, and so kind of bookmarking everything to that date, the Prime Minister had his blue ribbon panel meet on Monday, Tuesday, and then on Thursday. And the blue ribbon panel, as you might know, was set up by the Prime Minister to fix this problem with the kickbacks and what's going on with the factions. And he had a big group meeting. Initially, it was about 20, maybe 30 members of the parliament, upper house, lower house, faction members, non-faction members, but and also some of the people who were implicated in the Abe scandal, the group of 5 there, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Taro Aso, and the Secretary General, Mr. Motegi. So pretty high-powered, pretty packed. And the Prime Minister met with these guys, and they were talking about what we're going to do with this funding scandal, and how do we keep the public prosecutors from moving forward more aggressively on us, on our friends, on the people who are in the various factions. So as you know, that there are 6 factions of the LDP, and the Prime Minister was trying to figure out how we can keep the public prosecutors' temperature down, no more arrests, no more kind of implications, and still keep the public somewhat at bay, knowing that the politics and money are intertwined, and there's too much of it going on, and the LDP is not very trustworthy, and this Prime Minister is not doing what he said he was going to do, to placate that and still get us to the opening of the diet. And the reason why we want to get to the opening of the diet is because then parliamentary immunity steps in, and the public prosecutors cannot touch any of the members of the upper house or the lower house, even in spite of a finding of crime by them, but not by their staff or their accountants. So just to bring you up to speed, the 3 factions that were implicated the heaviest, the Abe faction, the Motegi faction, the Abe faction, the Nikai faction, and Mr. Kishida's faction, all 3 of those, their accountants, the treasurer within the faction, have been indicted and will be facing arrest and some sort of a prosecution. Other than that, there's only 2 diet members who really suffered as a consequence of this burgeoning scandal. And I think the Prime Minister was impressed upon, do something about it, fix your own shop, don't allow us to come in and order things around, because it's a public prosecutor kind of telling the big dog what to do, and the big dog is Mr. Kishida and the LDP. So they had their blue ribbon panel meeting on Monday, Tuesday, and the final one was on Thursday. Monday and Tuesday went, as you would expect, a lot of turmoil among the leadership. Mr. Kishida trying to figure out a way to go forward. The suggestion was that we disband the faction system. This was not greeted well by Mr. Motegi or by Mr. Aso. But on Wednesday, the Prime Minister. Yes, Maya. Oh,
Timothy, I think that we're experiencing yes a bit of unstable connection. So
with me?
yes, I'll continue being. Well, we have to figure out which side it is, but could you please continue with the briefing and then I'll see what I can do behind the scenes.
Okay. You think it might be
Yes.
on my side?
No, I'm not sure that's on your side. It's probably here. Okay.
Okay. Okay, let me continue on, and I hope you can catch all of this. In any event, the Prime
Yes.
Minister decided on Wednesday he's going to move very aggressively. He's going to disband his faction. He's going to disband the Abe faction, and the Nikai faction decided on Friday to disband itself. This was not actually reported to his partners in crime, Mr. Motegi or Mr. Aso. It just kind of was blurted out. It is reported that Mr. Aso found out about it by reading about it on the internet and not being in concert with the Prime Minister. And as you know, without the Abe faction having a leader, basically the government, the cabinet office has been run by Mr. Motegi, Mr. Aso, and Mr. Kishida, with Mr. Aso playing a central role balancing out Mr. Kishida and Mr. Motegi, because those two don't get along very well. So Mr. Aso was in a kind of pivotal role. And so for the Prime Minister to call this pretty outrageous decision to disband the faction system really threw everything into turmoil. They got into some heated discussions. I think probably they're not on the best of terms, but they did survive until Friday. So on Friday, the emperor crossed the moat in his motorcade. He went up to the Diet building, and he opened the parliament just a little bit before noon. A very brief ceremony. Everybody was in their morning tuxedos, dressed to the nines, and that was it. So not much other parliamentary business was done, but the Diet at least opened. So all of the excitement that we're going to be looking forward to is going to happen this next week when the Diet is in session. So the pressure on what we're going to do with the factions has still been left unsettled, but at least the public prosecutors are not going to be attacking the Diet members. And so I think the Prime Minister figures out maybe he's escaped that bullet, and he will go for a little bit more. Unfortunately, his popularity, the poll came out just this last week, his popularity, or actually the popularity of the cabinet this time, is 24%. That's the lowest the popularity of the cabinet has been since 2012, when the LDP lost power. So as a consequence of these things that are going on, what the Prime Minister did, there's been some real fractures. Maybe 6 months ago, we were talking about who is potentially a good replacement for Mr. Kishida when he decides to step down. The presidency, the election for president of the LDP, and thus the Prime Minister, won't be until September, October of this year. So there's some time, but it is a good time to be talking about it. And Mr. Motegi was mentioned rather prominently. And I think that prominence is going in the other direction now. Importantly, he's had some defections from his faction. That almost never happens. And when it does happen, it's a big deal. And it might be just one or two people who are mad at the leader or some policy that was decided by the faction, and they leave. On Friday, Mr. Motegi lost 5 people from his faction. And that's pretty significant from the upper house and from the lower house, members of his faction. And importantly, he lost Yuko Obuchi. Miss Obuchi is the daughter of former Prime Minister Obuchi, who actually died in office, and his chief cabinet secretary is in the Motegi, or was part of the Motegi faction before it was the Motegi faction, and really groomed the prime minister's daughter to the position she is now. So she's the election strategy chief within the LDP. You might remember when there was the cabinet reshuffle, and then this scandal began to arise before it actually reached full bloom. Miss Obuchi was ushered in very deftly into the LDP structure, somewhat surprisingly, to take over this really chief central role. So the fact that she has now left that faction, she wouldn't have received that posting within the LDP were it not for Mr. Motegi in the first place. So this fracture is really deep, and she's taken 4 other members with her. And that fracture, not just of the Motegi faction, but of the other political groups, is likely to continue in earnest as the Diet gets into session. So as it stands right now, the Prime Minister has said we're going to disband these political factions and call them policy groups. And Mr. Aso and Mr. Motegi are saying, yeah, like hell, I'm not giving up my faction. You didn't talk with me about it, and I don't think it's a good idea. So it is likely that the 2 groupings known as the Motegi faction and the Aso faction will continue in some form or shape as a faction. And the other ones, Abe's has been dissolved, and it will now be a political policy group. And one of the restrictions for a political policy group is that it cannot have a fundraising party on the basis of this ununified group of people. It's not a faction. They can't provide a unified tax reporting. So if they want to throw a big party, they can't collect the funds by the faction accountant and report those funds as a tax income, which they should have done, and it's completely legal to do. They were skirting that, not reporting to the tax office, and that was the core reason, or the core scheme going on here, that they were collecting money, not reporting it to the tax authorities, pocketing some of it, and then distributing it to some of the other members of that political faction. So as it stands right now, they will solidify this more finally when the party gets together to define rules. How are we doing, Maya? Am I still rather static?
Well, no, you're fine at the moment. Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Okay, good. So they can't raise funds except with the individual. So I might be Mr. Big Shot. I'm going to have a party, and so all of the people in my policy group will come. They'll bring their fellows, but that money will be coming to me as an individual, and I need to report that. And if I distribute some of the profits to my friends in the policy group, you can do that, except you just have to report it. You have to report it from the giver's side and from the recipient side as well. So hopefully this is going to be making things a little bit more transparent. There's no guarantee that it will. And the knives are already out for the Prime Minister. People frequently ask me, what's going to happen with the Prime Minister? Is he still good until this election term comes up for party president? And it's difficult to predict that. It's difficult to actually say with a high degree of certainty. And the reason is because not only has he lost credibility within the faction that elected him as president, but the key component of his election was the Abe faction. Without the Abe faction, the votes of the Abe faction, and the factions generally vote as a bloc. And when he became president of the LDP, at that time, the Abe faction had 100 members. It's got 98 or 97 members now. But at that time, they had 100 members who voted for Mr. Kishida to become the prime minister. Now with the Abe faction in disarray, and many of them blaming the prime minister, or maybe they didn't like him in the first place, but they voted along faction lines, it would be difficult for the prime minister to succeed himself without that strong Abe faction vote. So what's going to happen with the Abe faction? It's unclear right now. they will be all independents, but belonging to a political study group. So who knows how that's going to happen or how that's going to shake out. We don't know if this whole thing helps or hinders Mr. Kishida. And so we're going to sit on it for a week. But as you might know, Dan Harada and Dan Harada is a established fixture within the LDP politics. He's a foreigner that has naturalized into Japanese citizenship, so he can join a political party, and he's joined the LDP. He's been an LDP member for as long as I've known him, maybe 35 years. And he and I are going to talk about what's going on in the LDP, what's going on with Mr. Kishida this Friday. So we're giving the Diet a week to kind of talk about what's going on. Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, it opens up in the plenary session for the opposition to be questioning the cabinet and the prime minister. So Thursday and Friday are going to be very rambunctious. And given a day and a half to observe that, Dan and I are going to read the tea leaves and predict to you for maybe 30 minutes during a lunchtime break what it all means to Mr. Kishida. The title of this program is Kishida's Gamble. Maya, how do people sign on to that?
Yes, well, it will be open for viewers on LinkedIn. Basically, there is no need for signing up at the moment, because whenever, from 12 o'clock on Friday, everybody who wants to watch the briefing, they can do that by going to Langley Squire's account on YouTube, on LinkedIn.
So it's just like this briefing here.
Yes.
People just maybe they get a notice if they're connected to you or me.
Yes, if they're connected to you or if they're connected to me, they'll get a notice.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So for those of you that can, please join us on Friday at lunch to get 30 minutes of what's actually going on. It's going to be a contemporary, really timely briefing on the Kishida administration. So moving on, the factions now, we have two factions left. We've got the Tado Aso faction and the Motegi faction. The Tado Aso faction is 56 members. The Motegi faction is 53. The Moriyama faction dissolved on Friday. That had 8 members. So the 98 that were in the Abe faction, the Kishida faction had 45. That's gone, and the Nikai faction is also gone. So it's really going to be tumultuous. The opposition party now will have a little bit more wind in their sails to criticize the government, and it is possible that they will have some unified force with some of the members of the LDP that they didn't have anything in common with earlier, and maybe they can't, or they're not going to be voting along strict faction lines. So that's one of the great powers of having a faction, is that you have your breakfast meeting before you go into the Diet and you say, everybody, this is how we're going to vote. So make sure you vote that way. And pretty religiously, they follow that. It's rare for them not to. There are secret ballots where nobody knows how you voted, but most ballots are either you stand up, you raise your hand, it's a voice vote, or they have a chip that they distribute and people can see that. So less likely is it going to be a secret ballot. So everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So there's a lot going to be happening this next week. Monday's going to be somewhat quiet, and then it's going to heat up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and all into the coming weeks. The turmoil is not going to end. And at the same time, the government has to operate. So it is possible that there could be a no confidence motion lodged against the prime minister, in which case, if enough people vote for it, it will close down the House. It'll forcibly close down the House. And that means all of the members of the lower house, 450 odd, will have to go for election, maybe a 10-day election cycle. The other way is that the prime minister could close down the House because he feels the wind in his sails. He feels like he's done a good job, that the public will reward him with staying in power, with electing a few more LDP members than there was before the election. That doesn't look likely. The other critical thing we've got coming up is on April 10th, President Joe Biden has extended a state visit invitation to Mr. Kishida. So he will travel on the 10th to Washington, D.C. This sort of thing, it's very formal, it's lavish. There'll be a state dinner. There'll be several policy pronouncements that come out as a consequence of that. But it's not very far away from the 16th. I'm sorry, it's the 28th, where there's a by-election to fill a couple of empty seats. So there are 3 empty seats right now. A by-election needs to be held to fill those seats, and that's already been established as being on April 28th. So assuming the Prime Minister spends 4 days in Washington, D.C., he comes back to Tokyo. If he's going to call a general election to coincide with the by-election, which is a kind of a good time to do that if he's going to do it, he's only got 4 or 5 days to pull that together and make the announcement. And then the 10-day election period starts. So a lot's going to happen between now and then. In the meantime, he has to pass the budget. This is going to be one of the largest budgets that Japan has passed, including the defense spending and the recovery for the Noto Peninsula and the helping the fisheries because of the complete ban on importation of food stocks by Russia and China. So there's a lot of suffering going on, and so a lot's going to happen there in a very, very brief period of time. So keep your eye on that. Let's see what else we've got going on. There's some news coming out of North Korea, and also in the Trump campaigning. The United States is going through their election campaign. The Prime Minister wanted to have his state visit with the United States in March. The budget passes in April. He didn't want it to be in April. I think he thought, or still thinks, he doesn't have that much time. He's got to have it quicker, and it's a bad idea just before a state visit to kick your prime minister out. So that was his hope. There might be a little bit more time to consider that now, but they've got to pass the budget first. State visit is 10 days later. If the prime minister can survive that long, and we will know that pretty soon. Within the next 2 weeks, we'll know how the dice are being rolled there. But the prospect of a Trump presidency is starting to loom pretty high, and everybody on this briefing is already very familiar with U.S.-Japan relations, and Japan is traditionally pretty fickle when it comes to election campaigns. If the guy is in office and he's going to stay in office, he's got another 4 years, the Japanese typically tend to stay with the guy that's in office. And this will be the election campaign for Biden's second term. So pretty much the Japanese typically stay with the guy who's already in office. Mr. Trump in his campaign, should he become president, is going to be even more, he wants to even the score. If Japan continues to stick with Biden during his campaign, they lost that gamble, and now President Trump is back in the presidency, and U.S.-Japan relations is going to suffer as a consequence of that. So Mr. Aso, as you might recall, visited Washington, D.C. 3 weeks ago. He went with Mr. Nakasone, the son of deceased Prime Minister Nakasone, to talk with the Biden administration and make some policy statements and things like that. He attempted to see Mr. Trump and was rebuffed. So that's a little bit of a kind of a call sign that unless Japan really begins to make decisions and decide who they're going to be standing behind, I think those battle lines are already being drawn. So what's going on with Trump is of keen interest to what's going on here in Japan and policymakers and delegations that are traveling to Washington, D.C. So it's going to be really tense over the summer and into the fall, something to watch out for. North Korea is experiencing some change in attitude. Our great leader, Kim Jong-un, has decided that he's going to change the constitution which states that it is the defining goal of North Korea to unify with the South and to join our brothers. He's going to change that now, and he's going to identify the South Koreans as our greatest potential enemy. And he's also canceled the no-fly zone between North and South Korea. He's also said just recently that the border, the maritime border, he will no longer honor, and that North Korea's interpretation of where their border lies is not the interpretation that was agreed upon in earlier negotiations. So a lot is going on there. Monuments that are dedicated to the reunification of North Korea and South Korea and our brothers and our sisters are actually being demolished. So this ratcheting up is really beginning to take on more of a suggestive war footing. North Korea fired a couple of ballistic missiles just this last week, multiple-headed ballistic cruise missiles. They weren't loaded, obviously, with those warheads, but another show of force and testing the waters there. But since the 1953 armistice between North Korea and South Korea, it's been relatively peaceful. They are still officially in a state of war, but peace has prevailed. So it really is worrying a lot of analysts that are watching this, how things are going to go. The presidential election for Mr. Yoon is April 10th, the same day that the state visit of the prime minister into Washington, D.C. There's been a bit of a scandal going on there. His wife has been accused of accepting a bribe, a purse that was given by somebody in November. It's started to boil up, and a controversy is going on there. You might recall that Mr. Yoon became president of South Korea just by a hair, just by a margin, and the comeback to the opposition party who lost that is really building force. And with this new scandal, I don't know if there's anything to it, but what's going on in South Korea is very important to all of us here in Japan and something that we need to continue to watch. Let me see what else we've got. I want to cut this short, Maya. The Expo Challenge, we talked about what's going on in Osaka with the Expo that's about 480 days away. All of the pavilions, not all of the pavilions have been spoken for. So the government is going to be building those pavilions and dedicating them as multi-purpose for various countries to participate in. But they're still having a bit of a problem there. There's a little bit of worry that the costs have chased different countries away from actually sponsoring this. And with the labor shortage, the prices for labor have gone up. And now we have the Noto Peninsula disaster. And the prime minister announced on Friday, so there was a little bit of business that was taken care of, but he's announced a package of 155 billion yen to recover and to rectify the problems that are going on in Noto. And there is the suggestion that he's going to encourage the construction workers in Osaka working on the Expo to be diverted to Noto. And if this happens, it would be a huge blow to Ishin, who dominates politics in Osaka, as you know, and who pushed forward this idea to host the Expo 3 years ago when this first came up. So it's a pretty big deal. Continue to watch that too. I've got two more pieces of news, Maya. I'll try and get through them pretty quickly. Daihatsu, as you know, production was ceased there because of the data that they were providing to the government was falsified. They shut down voluntarily, of course, as this is done here. They closed down all of the production in December, and they said they would probably open up in January, mid-January. That date has come and passed, and just this last week they announced that 3 of the 4 lines will stay closed until mid-February now. And this isn't by a decree by the government. It is what you would call government consultation, where the company self-polices themselves with Big Brother watching them and telling them, this is how you need to fix your problem, and you please do it right away. So Daihatsu is doing that. They've closed down all of their plants. 3 of them will go back up in February, but they've also discontinued. This is amazing. They've discontinued. Let me see. They've discontinued how many vehicles? They've actually recalled 320,000 vehicles as a consequence of this. These are models that have already gone out into the commerce, and the data manipulation goes back to 1989, and it involves 64 models. And some of this was not just data manipulation. They actually just lied about some of the air crash tests and the deployment of the airbags. So that's what this is all about. They're owned by Toyota, and production for Toyota, they contribute about 6% to Toyota's annual revenue. So it's a big deal for them. They were established in 1907 to build internal combustion engines. They started their first vehicle, a 3-wheeled vehicle that you might see in Okinawa every once in a while. A 3-wheeled vehicle. They were very popular in producing those. They went into 4-wheel vehicles. And in 1967, they were purchased by Toyota. So what's going on there is pretty shaky given the dominance of the automobile industry in this country. Finally, price hikes. Grocery stores and convenience stores have noticed a uptick in their revenue, even while people have decided to purchase less. So as prices continue to rise, and throughout 2023, you might know that almost every item that's sold in a convenience store or in a grocery store has experienced a price hike. In spite of that, these companies have enjoyed record profits, not hugely, but over the last year, 2.4% they have increased in their profit. It's a record number for them to receive in profits. But as a consequence of the price rises, people are a little bit more selective in what they're buying, traveling, petroleum costs, that sort of thing. And you see it really clearly in how people are purchasing in the grocery stores. Similarly, in the convenience stores, which have also enjoyed a boom because of the influx of foreigners into the country, their prices have increased, but their margins have increased by 4.1%, even though the users have increased by 2.7%. So there's a lot going on financially there. The Bank of Japan is still thinking about what they're going to do about the inflation rate, and the Prime Minister is on a bend trying to convince companies you need to raise salaries. You need to do that, and the spring offensive starts in April and May. So there's a lot of not riots, but protests and rallies for higher wages. That's coming down the path too. We don't know if Mr. Kishida will be Prime Minister at that point too, but there is a lot of rock and roll going on. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm open to taking some questions and hearing from those of you who are more deeply involved or more knowledgeable about some of these issues. So thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Before we move into the Q&A session, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. And of course, first of all, invite everybody who wants to share their thoughts, comments, and questions with us in Clubhouse. Or, in Clubhouse, you can raise your hand and I'll bring you up on stage, or on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. While in Clubhouse, when you come up on stage, please try to keep your questions relevant to Japanese politics and public policy as well, public affairs, so that we can be concise and also to the point. And with this, I will start reading out the questions we got on LinkedIn first, Timothy. Of course, once again, to everybody in Clubhouse, please do come up on stage if you want to share your thoughts with us or want to communicate with Timothy directly. So the first question we have here is from Cam, and he wrote, Okay, in light of the scandals involving the LDP and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's new depths of unpopularity and defiance of political gravity, is it now appropriate for Japan to elect a female prime minister? And furthermore, is the dissolution of the party an attempt to prepare for such a candidate?
It's a good question. I think it's a little bit early. There are some candidates out that would make good prime minister material. I don't think that there's been enough experience in presidential campaigns or elections for these females to rise up to dominance. But at the same time, the earlier candidates are not very popular. Mr. Motegi is not very popular. He was a heavy contender. Maybe Taro Aso's star has at least stayed level. He is a faction member, but he's not a faction leader. Excuse me. And it is interesting that women are, actually making inroads into boardrooms, into executive positions. The prime minister just appointed the first female for the a tax commission. She's going to take office on April 1st. So that's a big deal. And we're seeing this more and more gradually, but I think it's a little bit early for a female to become prime minister, but you just never know. It's really a lot of the rules that we measured things by are really being challenged now. So it's very difficult to say. And I think programs like mine or like this one are becoming increasingly popular because people need to know, and they don't know, and there's so much change in the air. What's going on with Mr. Kishida, what's going on with the Abe faction, that sort of thing. So politics is dynamically changing, and in a month's time, we're going to have a different kind of environment that we're talking about, rather than the one we talked about 2 months ago. So a lot is going on. Thanks for the question, Cam.
Thank you for it. Yes, and we continue again from Cam. Do you believe? Okay, excuse me. There is another one before that. So, when Trump is officially nominated, the Republican nominee for presidential candidate, will the prime minister meet with Trump?
No, I don't think so. I think his emissaries will meet. But as a candidate, it's possible that Trump could actually travel to Japan. I don't know. The campaign is pretty tight. I don't know how much it would benefit a candidate for president of the United States to make a foreign travel. They're just doing too many other things domestically. But if he did come to the United States, if he did travel to Japan, the prime minister would definitely meet him. I don't think the prime minister would make a trip to, I don't think so. I think when Mr. Kishida goes on the state visit on April 10th, 11th, and 12th, I don't think he would be that would just be rude. I don't think he would do that.
All right. Okay, thank you for that. And then, do you believe that prime minister will continue? Of course. Probably you partially answered the question already, but so do you believe the prime minister will request to meet with Trump during his state visit?
Yeah.
Or sometime before the November election?
We just had an earthquake.
Oh,
That's
yes.
a big one.
Oh, it's a big one. Uh-oh. Right. It's a big earthquake. I hope that everybody who is feeling it is in a safe environment. All right.
Oh.
It's shaking quite. Maybe you can hear also some of the furniture just hitting the wall. Right. Okay.
That thumping is my heart settling down.
Oh, right. Stay put. Okay.
That was a big one.
It is.
We are still rocking.
It's continuing. Yes, we are rocking to different parts of Tokyo, but yeah. Okay. Whew.
Whew. Every day, rock and roll.
Indeed. Well,
so,
I do.
Anyway,
yes.
Getting back to the question, I don't think Mr. Kishida will visit with Mr. Trump during the state visit. His emissaries will. but a lot of his emissaries are going to be tied up here in Tokyo as well. And if, in fact, the best time for him to hold a general election is in April 28th, because there's a by-election anyway. There's going to be 3 seats, maybe 4 seats that are available. And if you're going to have those elections, there is thinking that says, why don't you just have everybody in the House run for election too? Yeah, difficult to say. And we don't know the extent of anger and animosity within the LDP directed towards this prime minister quite yet. We'll know that in maybe a couple of weeks. It'll become much more apparent.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that. And the earthquake is over at the moment. Hopefully, there haven't been many, let's say, damage or a lot of damage in other parts because I don't think that the epicenter was in Tokyo. Okay. So we continue with the questions, Timothy.
Okay.
Yes, we have one from Thanos Lion Satus, probably. On LinkedIn, and another one from Ricky Kaminsky in Clubhouse. So I'll go in chronological order. I'll read them to you. So the first one is from Thanos. Here we go. The rise of cost is a global phenomenon. The Australian government is on the back of major retailers for the extreme hike that has taken a toll to farmers, as profit from the hikes are going only to retailers, but the payout to producers has stalled. Climate change has wiped out on many occasions profits of the producers, so salaries is not the only issue any government should address, but holistically moderate and analyze, and to an extent regulate with retailers. Okay, so obviously this is a comment, it's not a question. So your thoughts on this? Thank you. Your
And that's
thoughts?
coming from Tom Logan?
Oh, no, it's coming from Thanos Lionsatus, I believe. And I apologize if I mispronounce the family name. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Thomas.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't have anything to add there. The price increases, we've been reporting on those every time, and it comes in waves where the Japanese government announces we have received requests to increase prices for 450 frozen food items, and they publish that, and then the price increase goes into effect the next month. But we've been reporting on that. It's come in different waves. Typically in January, there's a price increase, but yeah, there's been thousands and thousands of products that increase in prices in a country where price increases are very, very difficult to push through to consumers. So that's changed too. The only thing that hasn't changed is giving workers a higher salary. And it seems like just this last year, they did get a boost in their bonus and their annual salaries, but maybe only to the extent of maybe 3% or 3.1%, when inflation was going at 4% or 5%. So they're still, losing money comparatively. So that's begun to slow down a little bit just these last couple of months. So the Bank of Japan is wondering if they're going to kick off their inflation rate again and increase the bond yield. So it's very complicated. It's not my area of specialization, but watching that tells you what's going on with the economy.
Indeed, yes. All right, thank you for that. And just a little bit on the earthquake, we got a message from Patricia on YouTube. 4.0 in Tokyo. The earthquake, it was centered somewhere in Kanagawa.
Yeah.
Breathing again. And then from Mario just now, it was 5.1 in Funabashi. That's the epicenter. So obviously it was really strong there. All right. And then we proceed with the next question from Ricky Kaminsky. Ricky, thank you very much
Hi,
for the
Ricky.
question. So I'm wondering if politicians until now are only towing the party line and voting in blocks. So could the current turmoil be a chance to strengthen real democracy, where all elected officials will vote based on their own conscience? Could
That's
this
right.
be the legacy?
Yeah, I think, in fact, that is a likelihood. If you get the independents to vote their heart and they campaign on that, I'm an independent. I don't belong to any political faction. I don't belong to any party. I'm here for you. And this is how I feel on these issues. That will help greatly. Typically, as a campaign now, I belong to this political party, and the political party stands for this, and we have a manifesto. And the guy who is the boss of the party, he's standing right here too. He's going to say a couple of words about how great I am too. So that's typically how it's gone in recent memory. Moving forward, yes, there's right now the independents in the LDP outweigh the people who are in the factions. That wasn't the composure 3 weeks ago. Almost everybody belonged to some sort of political faction. And the LDP, the power of the LDP is that it's got this umbrella where different, I mean, they could even almost be political parties in and of themselves. They have 40, 50 members. One of them had 100 members. It could actually be a political party on its own, but because they're all together as a liberal, democratic, conservative party, there's huge power there, a multiplier effect. So that's why the opposition party is so weak, because they're not an umbrella. The largest opposition political party is what the Constitutional Democratic Party has 96 members compared to the LDP's 259. That's in the lower house. And they have 38 members in the upper house compared to the LDP's 118. So that's a pretty big dog. So yeah, Ricky, I think the independents are now going to show a little bit more muscle. And the people who are independents, Shigeru Ishiba, there are a couple of other, Mr. Suga is unaffiliated with the political faction. These people, their star is gradually going to be rising. And it could be that the next prime minister is of that ilk, that the public is sick and tired of the factional politics. They don't want to have Mr. Aso as a prime minister. They don't want to have Mr. Motegi. They don't want to have any of the group of five Abe faction leaders, who, by the way, in the blue ribbon panel decided that we might be punishing them once the diet gets started. We can talk about that later. But this group of five is kind of untouched. They were identified as, taking the majority of kickbacks or kind of managing it. They've been identified, but they haven't been, the public prosecutors have not filed charges or indictments against them. And I think what they've decided is that the LDP should clean up their own house. It's like Daihatsu. So the government didn't move into Daihatsu and then kick over tables and stuff. They said, Daihatsu, you need to get your act together. This is how we think you should get your act together. Similarly, I think with the political shenanigans going on, the public prosecutor's office spoke with the prime minister and said, this is how you should fix things. If you want us to back off, you should do this, this, and this. And in very quick order, that's exactly what happened. So I'm speculating on how that happened in the conversations between the public prosecutor's office and representatives of Mr. Kishida, but things did happen awful quickly and very dramatically. So there's that hidden hand in the background kind of calling the shots. And yeah, it's a great thing to contemplate, Ricky. So we'll keep our eye on that.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that as well. And we have another question actually, which came throughout the week, this past week on YouTube. So I'll read it out to you. It is from Nicholas Hills. And
Hi, Nick.
yes, hello, Nick. Thank you for watching. So here is the question: are there any serious independent think tanks who look at geopolitics in Japan that are purely Japanese, with no Americans or other non-Japanese members? I can't say I have ever heard of any, but if they exist, I would be very interested to hear Timothy talk about what situation in Asia over the next 5 to 10 years.
I'm sorry, Maya just froze when you said, I'd like to hear from Timothy, and then you froze. What was the rest of that?
Did you lose me?
Yes, I lost you just the last part of
I say,
your question.
okay. All right. The question is, are there any? Can you hear me now?
Yes,
I'm
I got the
losing
part
you, I
about the
think.
political think tanks, independent political think tanks that don't have any. I guess what you're saying is Americans in there, like think tank guys from the United
Right.
States,
And then,
right?
so Nicholas wrote, I can't say I have ever heard of any, but if they exist, I would be very interested to hear Timothy talk about what their analysis is of the international situation in Asia over the next 5 to 10 years.
Great question. Yes, Nomura has a political think tank. There are a couple, actually. They're being run by people who were dabbling in government or in politics, maybe formerly a member of the House or the Senate, and have joined research organizations that are tied to big groups. But exclusive of any Americans being on staff, I don't know about that, because the Americans and the Brits are really good at producing these kinds of strategic thinkers, and employing them in the military and giving them jobs like positions in Misawa throughout their careers, and they become very good. They become honed in these kinds of skills and these kinds of analysis. The Japanese are not that good at that. So having the foreigners involved at some level is pretty attractive. So I don't think it excludes them from providing good analysis. But if the question is, I'm looking for purely Japanese, providing purely Japan-based analysis on geopolitics, there are a couple out there. I can generate a list for you, Nick, and maybe talk about them next week if it's of keen interest to you.
Well, thank you. Let's look into it for sure. And then we have also Yuka with us in Clubhouse. Hello, Yuka. Good evening to you. You are on mute. I cannot hear you. You're with us on stage, but your mic is muted.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I mean, hey, Maya, can you put me as an admin? The reason is if there, another quake hit Tokyo area, you guys just leave, okay? And then I can close the room. So
definitely, yes. I just made you an admin. So thank you very much. As always, I appreciate your help, because without you, sometimes it's difficult to bring people
I
on
am
stage.
actually listening to you guys on LinkedIn because I can barely hear you on Clubhouse.
Okay, I'm sorry for that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, you know what? Let me ask questions, and then I'm gonna go back to LinkedIn because I can barely hear you.
Okay, yes, please go ahead with the questions.
See, I'm hearing myself. There is a huge lag between Clubhouse and LinkedIn. But anyway,
right. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a lag.
Yeah. True. Okay, I'm gonna. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
That was a great question.
I have two questions, but I'm just gonna stick with one question today, and I'm gonna leave another one next time. About the fraction. I'm sorry, fraction. No, you don't talk about fraction. Fraction. Yes. I think I asked this 2-3 years ago when I started coming to this room, and what's the purpose of fractions? And then you talked about that. It's very important. The people get diet members get together before the diet sessions, and then they get instructed on who to vote. And then also, as I understand, the purpose for faction is to educate new diet members. But as the sort of situation and the things are sort of unfolding, those a reason for factions are changing. It seems like that's why it's super easy to just dissolve them. So I'd like to hear about that. Thank you, and I'm going back to the LinkedIn.
Yeah. Okay. So this question has been raised again and again in the Blue Panel committee hearings, and they've been examining why we have factions, what is the role of factions, and it's become lopsided. So when the factions were initially created, it's because two political parties were artificially joined. There was the Liberal Party, there was the Democratic Party. They were joined together to make the Liberal Democratic Party. And once they made that joining to make them stronger and more powerful against the socialists and the communists, this is in the 1950s, the people who did belong to the liberal part had a faction within this new party, and the people who were in the the Democratic part had their faction. So from inception, they had two political factions, and then it just grew. And it grew from not just those seeds there, but also as a personality cult. So a political individual who is a member of the parliament, who has succeeded himself 4 or 5 or 6 times and has begun to amass a lot of support and has lots of political donations, he can use his donations to help people that are suffering, that they might lose their election. And God, if you just help me win my election, sir, I will be forever indebted to you. That happens a lot. And so when you begin to help people and you show up on the top of the campaign truck and you say some good things with that 15 microphones that are all banded together, and you say something nice about this candidate, they owe you. They owe you big time. And so these political factions have grown up as a consequence of that. But yes, one of the defining purposes of a political faction is to keep these guys together and to educate them. This is how we're going to vote, and this is why it's important. And when you have a speech in your home district, these are the things that you should talk about that are important to me, that are important to us, our group. And when they vote about something inside the diet, our position on that particular issue, tobacco or about tax or about farming or about liquor or about any of these things, our position is this. So that should be your position here. Here are your talking points. So it helps them, makes them look smart, makes them look good. And the other thing is that being a member of the parliament is not easy, and people don't know how things happen. They don't know how things run. And people who have run for an election, sometimes, they might have been a lawyer, they might have been, an author of a book or something like that. Their world is completely different when they become a member of parliament, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what's legal, what's illegal, what they shouldn't do, just for purposes of public consumption, how they should dress, what kind of car they should drive. There's a lot of education that goes on there. Most Diet members in their first term need a lot of hand-holding, a lot of training, and they rely on the older fellows to kind of guide them, not to give them helpful suggestions where they actually end up in trouble, because people do that, right? It's somebody that they can really bind together with. And then that stickiness begins to get even more solid in the second election or the third election, and the faction rewards them by giving them positions of power or committee chairs. So the other function of a faction is they negotiate with the central government. So I have a faction, and an election has just been held. We have a new prime minister, and there are lots of committee chairs. There's cabinet portfolios to be distributed. I'm going to talk to the prime minister or to his cabinet officials, and I'm going to say, look, I helped you become prime minister. I want 2 cabinet portfolios. I don't care what they are, but I need 2 of them. Or maybe you'd say, I want my guy to be the foreign minister, or I want my guy to receive these party posts. And you distribute them based on how much power you had to help this guy get what he wanted. So it's not just the faction system. I mean, it's this whole thing that we call the LDP and the creation of government. So one of the requirements, or one of the criticisms that the Blue Ribbon panel addressed, was the ability of these factions to insist that these guys get ministerial portfolios. And as you'll remember, sometimes you scratch your head and say, how did that guy become minister of state? How did he become, in the cabinet? He's old, and he doesn't have a pedigree, and he's doing something. It doesn't matter. This is a distribution based on politics and on the weight of power that you have, and how you're going to generate more power in the near term. So That's what that's about. I hope that's somewhat responsive to your question.
Yuka, I hope that you heard this. All right, so Yuka is still on LinkedIn, listening to you there. We
Okay.
experienced a little bit of technical difficulties while you were talking. So in Clubhouse, it was difficult to hear you. I believe that it's difficult to, my voice is probably not very strong there either. But all right, so going back to the Osaka, the Expo 2025, Rumiko is there. So she's got a comment because she's a native Osakan. And well, let me read it out to you.
Okay.
So they say all the construction people and companies are going up to Noto Hanto to fix things rather than getting government jobs to build the Osaka Banpaku buildings. What are your thoughts, your insights on this, Timothy? Whether you have information?
So, yeah, I think that is happening. Some people will voluntarily do that. They're pouring concrete in Osaka for the expo, but maybe they have family or friends or somebody in Noto that is really suffering. They tell their boss, "Look, I'm checking out. I'm not going to get fired because I'm actually going there to help the people." I think you would get a little bit of sympathy there. The government hasn't stepped in and kind of forced that, but they could if, for example, they offer a premium to these people who go from the Osaka Expo, where they have a place to live, they have a place to eat. It's in Osaka. They're even if they're workers from Hokkaido, they've already got an established setup there. But going to Noto, they maybe don't have an established setup, but maybe they can make more money if the government says, if you're doing that, we're going to subsidize it. We've got 155 billion yen that we're going to dedicate to that to help build things, but we need the laborers too. And if you come up here, the typical market rate for a person who's pouring concrete is 10. We're going to be offering 15 for the next 10 months. So people would take up on that. And that's going to impact. I mean, Osaka is already having trouble with construction costs and also with the amount of laborers that are available there. And it could be that the prime minister just says, let's push off the expo. Let's postpone it, not cancel it, but let's postpone it. I think that's actually becoming more and more a higher likelihood. Plus, it gives Ishin a black eye, right?
That yes, you always take every possibility to score political points.
Yes.
So yes, indeed. Okay, so thank you for the insight, and it looks like we have quite a few people on LinkedIn who have said, "Stay safe, everyone." Everybody who is in Tokyo, in Kanagawa, and Kanto in general. So thank you very much for that. Yes, Roman and also Hiroko-san, Rumiko, Yuka as well. Patricia on YouTube, we appreciate your concern and consideration. So thank you very much. It also looks like we have exhausted all the questions at the moment, Timothy. So I know that, yes, the day is going to be long, a long one for you, a long one for me as well, for different reasons. So thank you very much, everybody who joined us. And today, to everybody who wasn't with us yesterday. Yes, it was too bad, but it was a wonderful walk. And to everybody who was with us and joined today, because yesterday was indeed a very long day for most of the people who joined the event. It was a great walk, and we are now considering the next event. We don't know when it will be yet because we have just finished, the one yesterday. But yes, we would like to continue with similar events, probably closer to Tokyo this next time. Thank you. Also, please remember that this week, Friday, that's February the 2nd at 12 o'clock, Timothy Langley and Dan Harada are going to have a briefing about the factions and what is actually going on within the LDP. So this will be a much deeper analysis of the LDP and the factions there, because here on Sunday we talk about LDP, of course, but many other things as well. So,
and also, there's no Q&A with Dan and I. It's just analysis.
It is just analysis, yes, at that point. So we are not going to answer questions at that time. But if you have time, 12 o'clock noon, please join us on
Please join
LinkedIn.
us.
Yes, Langley Esquire on LinkedIn. Yes, okay. Thanks very much indeed to everybody again. And we're looking forward to having you with us on Friday, also Sunday. And before that, on Wednesday at 8 o'clock, we're going to talk about the cultural dimensions and perceptions of death. So in Japan, India, and some other countries with Binati Shed. So be with us at that time too. Thanks a lot. That's all.
Thanks very much, Maya. Thanks for hosting this program.
Thank you.
See you guys next week, Friday. This
Friday.
weekend.
Yes.